Today, the defense rested in the New York criminal hush money trial where Donald Trump did not end up testifying. But Robert Costello, the former legal advisor to the prosecution's star witness, Michael Cohen, Costello did testify with the goal of undermining Michael Cohen's credibility. It didn't exactly work out that way. Instead, Mr. Costello ended up corroborating parts of Cohen's testimony. On May 14th, Michael Cohen testified, "I didn't trust him," meaning Bob Costello. "I believed, based upon all of our conversations, that he would immediately run back to Mr. Giuliani and that communication would be divulged to President Trump." Multiple emails read during Costello's cross-examination today confirmed exactly that, showing that Costello was indeed acting as a back channel to Trump and Giuliani, precisely as Michael Cohen claimed he was. Joining me now are Christy Greenberg, former federal prosecutor and former SDNY Criminal Division Deputy Chief, and Duncan Levin, former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. Thank you guys both for being here tonight. There's like a lot of specific legal stuff I want to get to, but first, just on the big picture, Christy, was it a good idea to end for the defense to end with Bob Costello?
It was a horrible idea. It actually helped bolster Michael Cohen's credibility. I mean, anything that makes Michael Cohen come off smelling like a rose, you have to think that's a bad idea for the defense. But these emails today, I mean, oozing with slime. I mean, Michael Cohen testified, "This guy wanted to be my lawyer, but I didn't really trust him. I thought he was just working for Donald Trump." And sure enough, we get emails today where, the emails are pretty explicit. We've got to make it appear as though we're not acting under the instruction of Rudy Giuliani or the president. Like, it's in writing. And the defense knows these emails exist. So, why in the world would you call this guy? Putting aside all of the antics that also happened in front of the jury, where he was just blatantly disrespectful, not something you would expect of a lawyer as a witness, much less somebody who held my former position at SDNY as a former federal prosecutor. It's maddening. But, I mean, all of those things, the style and today the substance, it was a total train wreck for the defense.
Okay, in no uncertain terms, bad idea.
Bad idea.
Now, the stage we are at now, Duncan, is Judge Merchan is basically deliberating on a number of decisions related to the instructions that the jury is going to be given, which is very important, if a little bit dry. But this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah, I mean, not all lawyering can be as sexy, unfortunately, as hush money payments and secretly recorded tapes. But this is more like reading the fine print of a contract. But it's so important because this is the way in which the jury interacts with all the evidence before it. And the prosecution, the Judge Merchan hasn't ruled formally on most of the requests, but it looks like it was a mixed bag for the prosecution and the defense. So the prosecution won a big victory today or I should say a somewhat big victory today.
A meaningful victory.
In some of this small print. The two of the elements of the offense are that the falsification of business records was done with the intent to defraud and the intent to conceal the commission of another offense. And it looked to me...
That's the felony charge.
And that's the bump up. And on that bump up, the prosecution won sort of two little victories. One was that those are not two separate things, that the intent to defraud and the intent to conceal the commission of another crime are the same thing.
Okay.
But the more sort of interesting thing is that it looks like Judge Merchan is ruling that not all of the jurors need to be unanimous in the way in which he covered up this conspiracy to promote an election by unlawful means, meaning that one juror could decide the Stormy Daniels payment does it. One juror could decide it was the Karen McDougal payment that did it. Another juror could say it was a tax payment that did it, and they don't all need to agree on it. So that gives the prosecution a lot of flexibility.
And that seems like something that Alvin Bragg foresaw, right? Because all along here, it was, okay, we understand what the misdemeanor is here, falsification of business records. To make it a felony, there needs to be that secondary step-up charge. And Bragg long maintained, correct me if I'm wrong, it could be a number of things. And that was not satisfying, I think, particularly to those of us in the media. It was like, well, what are the things? What is the thing that you're going to pursue? He never outlined clearly one thing, and it sounds like the judge said, that's fine. It could be a number of different things, and jurors can come to different conclusions.
Yes. The one caveat, which is still, I believe, an open question, is to whether those unlawful means must be criminal, which is what the defense is arguing, versus whether it just can be unlawful, meaning it could also be civil. And the defense was really key on wanting to have this willfully language kind of put in, meaning that you're acting intentionally, and that what you're doing is going to result in a violation of a crime, of the law. So that the judge hasn't quite decided on yet. But yes, I agree with Duncan. This is a win for the prosecution. It gives them flexibility.
As you have watched this from the sidelines, given this sort of hypothesis that you've, made public, this is really kind of a form of organized crime or operates like that. What have you thought about this hush money trial?
It felt familiar to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I found that my own reaction so dramatic that I tried to suppress it, but it kept coming back and coming back. It's back fully now watching this trial.
Yeah.
They even did the Cosa Nostra trick of trying to bring people into court to rattle a witness, like the Godfather 2, Michael Corleone brings Frankie Pentangeli's brother from Sicily to try and rattle him. I don't think Lauren Boebert or J.D. Vance have that effect on a witness.
They didn't have to travel as far.
But it's a lot. They even dress like the mobsters do. So, yes, it felt familiar.
What did you, I mean, we sort of read that excerpt from David Pecker's testimony where he talks about this meeting in January of 2017. You're there. Dave Pecker enters the room. Trump says he knows more than anybody else here. Do you remember that meeting?
Yeah, I want to be careful. I don't want to comment on a witness's testimony until the jury has rendered a verdict. But I wrote down everything that happened. And if you read my memos, that's not recorded in it. It doesn't mean that Pecker's being dishonest. He may just have a different recollection than I do.
Interesting. We do have, just because some of the checks that Donald Trump allegedly signed are also on key dates in the administration. For example, the day that Donald Trump sent a $70,000 check to Michael Cohen, reimbursing him allegedly for the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. That's the same day that Trump was pressuring you to end the Flynn investigation in the Oval Office. Now, I'm not presuming you know about the reimbursement checks, but it does suggest that throughout the Trump presidency, he may have been, shall we say, multitasking. And I do wonder, as we go back to the sort of the idea that the Trump organization and indeed the Trump presidency may have operated in a kind of organized crime syndicate-like fashion. What parallels do you see in the sort of boss being involved in all of the business, if you will?
Well, he kind of turned the Oval Office into a social club, right? A version of John Gotti's Ravenite Social Club, where people just came in with the business at hand. Some of it was government, and apparently some of it was very private. I wasn't there at that same time to see him. I was there to see his chief of staff, who then said, "Hey, you want to visit the boss?" And I'm like, "No, I'm sure he's busy. I got a lot to do." No, don't worry about it. He's, no, come on.
That speaks, that sounds very much like a Godfather kind of, come in and kiss the ring.
Yeah. You want to see the big man, basically. And I tried very hard not to, but he ushered me in. And so that was one of my encounters with the president.
But it seems like there were these colorful characters, to be euphemistic about it, that were mixing in with the sort of normal day-to-day sort of affairs of the White House. Did that strike you as odd at any point, or was that just the way Trump was?
Well, odd in that a president doesn't operate that way. I'd seen other presidents up close, and because of their responsibilities, they exercise a certain amount of discipline, information management, but this was chaotic. But that was the way of this particular boss.
I got to ask you, because we've been talking so much about the way in which the prosecution is laying out a case that suggests the Trump campaign was desperate to quell another October surprise, right? We didn't learn about Stormy Daniels in the literal hours leading up to Election Day. We did hear more about Hillary Clinton's emails. I know that you played an instrumental role in all of that, and I wonder how you're thinking about the sort of information control in and around the election, and whether, you have any regrets.
I have a deep and lasting regret that we were involved at all. I felt that in the exact moment I was briefed on what had happened with the investigation on the 27th of October. It's interesting now to look back and see, as we were wrestling with this nightmare, trying to figure out which of our options was the least bad, all of this was going on the Trump side, trying to suppress information. And so obviously, I knew nothing about it, and I tried not to think about the political in making that decision, but it's a strange overlap of events.
Can I ask you about this desire to not think about the political? Because this particular Department of Justice, especially in its early days, seemed very concerned about appearing too political. In the aftermath of January 6th, there are a lot of folks on both sides of the aisle that say Merrick Garland and the DOJ were too concerned about the appearance of going after Trump after January 6th. They started the January 6th investigation too slow. They started it from the bottom up when they should have started from the top down. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's caught a lot of rocks, I'm reluctant to throw any, but I do think they overlearned some of the lessons from my own experience and from the Trump administration, and they were too slow. And it's cost us because we finally got a special counsel very late in the game, and we're stuck the way we are. And so, yeah, I would have hoped they would have moved faster. But again, given when they came into office, what they were trying to accomplish, I get why they did it, but I still think it was a mistake.
How do you feel when you think about, this hush money trial is likely to be the only criminal trial that goes forward? I mean, we don't know for certain, but given where the calendar is, this is the only one that it looks like the American public will have a verdict on before the election. As a former law enforcement guy, are you frustrated by the way this is all unfolding?
Yes, but I also have found this trial to be a great civics lesson for the American people. It appears more are paying attention than I would have expected, and they've seen this is how it works. You may not lose supporters when you shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue, but you will be held accountable. And this is what accountability looks like. You have to sit at that table, no matter who you are, and shut up. The jury is what matters. We will protect them at all costs. This is how it works, and it's a great lesson for the American people. The rule of law in this country, especially the court system, has passed its stress test. Slow on the federal side, but this is a great example for our people.
You say it's passed its stress test. Are you concerned that it may get a test unlike any other if Donald Trump is reelected? I mean, when you think about a second Trump administration, what do you think the implications would be for the FBI?
Oh, serious, for the Justice Department and the FBI, because Trump is coming for those institutions. He knows their power, and I think he has regrets that he didn't work hard enough to corrupt them last time. So he's coming for them, and that's a danger for all Americans. He's going to put people in positions in those organizations. He didn't have all-stars the last time. He'll have the bottom of the barrel this time, but people who will want to do his will, and that should worry every American. This election matters. Because of a reason like that, people have to participate. You cannot sit on the sideline. I don't care how you feel about Joe Biden, you must vote for him because the consequences on the other side are too severe.
Headlines that read, economy booms and American prosperity is back, are sort of the things you might expect from a Trump campaign video about what a second term might look like. But then there's this one. Industrial strength significantly increased, driven by the creation of a unified Reich. That would be a reference to the Third Reich, the official Nazi designation for Hitler's murderous genocidal regime. All of these headlines were part of a video that was reposted to the social media account of the Republican frontrunner. Now, the Trump campaign says the video came from a random account that a staffer reposted on Trump's Truth Social account and also his Instagram while Trump was in court yesterday. This is how the Biden campaign has responded. Parroting Mein Kampf while you warn of a bloodbath if you lose is the type of unhinged behavior you get from a guy who knows that democracy continues to reject his extreme vision of chaos, division, and violence. Joining me now is McKay Coppin, staff writer for The Atlantic and person who knows the Republican mind better than most. McKay, thank you for being here. And I just wonder if you can first of all, I should say that your colleague David Graham points out that there is a stock template that could be part of a plausible explanation for how these headlines made their way into that video. We have no reporting on that. We can't confirm that one way or another. But the fact of the matter is anti-Semitic Nazi language seems to be wending its way into conservative circles with more frequency here. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the way that this instance is part of a larger, broader pattern of radicalization on the right.
Yeah, I think that's really well said because, this is part of a pattern, right? I think that people see stuff like this and it's easy to jump to the conclusion that, Trump is like a crypto Hitler fan. But I actually think what's happening is that it is something more nuanced, but actually maybe more alarming, which is that throughout Republican politics, and especially kind of the conservative movement at the activist level, the rising generation of conservative activists and people who are going into conservative media and Republican politics have been raised on a steady diet of, triggering the libs style politics, which is to say they parrot fascistic rhetoric, racist rhetoric in a kind of quasi-ironic way, but that is actually meant to gin up support among really unseemly people, and then also to, frighten people on the left, and they think it's funny, right? The problem problem is that the longer that people kind of live in that digital universe where they're pretending to be fascists or neo-Nazis or racists, the more the line between the performance and reality starts to blur. And you've seen this time and again with people who are found out to be, for example, producers on Tucker Carlson's Fox News show, or, writers, speech writers in the White House, Stephen Miller, for example. These people are people who have spent so much time, kind of trying to upset the left by parroting Nazi or fascistic rhetoric, that they've sort of started to adopt those views unironically. And I think that's why, just to make this point quickly, why repeatedly when Trump is caught or Trump's campaign is caught using fascistic rhetoric, or Trump is caught dining with a blatantly kind of anti-Semitic white nationalist like Nick Fuentes, the defense is always, oh, that was bad staff work, right? He had a bad advice from his staffers. The staffers didn't vet the social media post. They didn't vet the person who he's having dinner with. At some point, you have to ask, well, why is the staff so willing to make these mistakes over and over again?
Yeah, I thought immediately of your Stephen Miller piece, which suggests that he is so intent on owning the libs and melting the liberal snowflakes that he starts, embracing a sort of radical right vision that then comes to fruition once he's in the White House with a Muslim ban or a child separation policy that he wholeheartedly embraces, if not is, the actual architect of. I understand the Stephen Miller part of it, the sort of 2.0 radical right. I do wonder, though, how you think the Josh Hawleys and the Ted Cruzes, who are a little bit older, they're, Harvard trained, they're not coming from such a reactionary, like trolling the libs style, self-radicalization into Republican politics, how they fit into the context that you just laid out.
Well, so I think it's a great point, because I think Ted Cruz is a prime example of somebody who was raised in a Republican Party where being a young conservative meant being kind of like a young William F. Buckley, right? He was probably he was a nerd. He went to Harvard. He wore blazers and, with flag pins. He was like that kind of guy coming up through the Republican Party of Reagan and Bush. But, I mean, he's in the Senate now, and I can think of relatively few senators who are better at adopting that kind of lib-triggering, snowflake-melting, right-wing trolling attitude than Ted Cruz. And, would he approve of a campaign ad that uses Nazi rhetoric? Probably not, on the record, but is it possible that in private he's chuckling about it? I think that's possible. There's a generational thing that's happened where I think a lot of Republicans who are currently in office have had to adapt to this new ethos that Donald Trump has championed, and you see it at every level of the GOP at this point.
Well, yeah, and that would be my next question, which is, what of the Republican voters, right? I mean, Biden's making the argument that people are rejecting anti-democratic fascist ideology, but the fact, we all have seen these polls. This is going to be a very, very tight race between the man who is the figurehead of this movement, Donald Trump, and the man who stands in opposition to it, Joe Biden. Does that argument about fascism, does the shadow of the Reich, whether, intentional or unintentional, move voters in the Republican Party at this point? I mean, are they along for the ride with Trump and Stephen Miller? Is the roller coaster has the train left the station?
I think certainly some of Trump's supporters are along for the ride, and they cheer stuff like this, or they think it's funny. I think a lot of Republican voters, the thing is, there's just negative partisanship is such a strong force in our politics at this point that a lot of Republican voters who wouldn't approve of stuff like this, or who would even be scandalized by it, when they live in their kind of algorithmically tailored, information bubble, they either don't come across this stuff, or if they do, it's always framed in a kind of what about fashion where the pivot is to look at this terrible thing Democrats are doing. And so I don't know if these sentiments are really widely held in the Republican Party, but I will say Joe Biden has staked his campaign on denormalizing Donald Trump and this type of rhetoric. And I think there's something admirable about it in some ways, defending democracy. I'm not sure if, as a campaign tactic, it's going to be successful, and I guess we'll find out in November.
And we'll find out what our country's all about after that.
Yeah.
McKay, thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time and reporting on all of this. McKay Coppins with The Atlantic.
Thanks, Alex.